that I am in control.
Well, welcome, David. Welcome to my little chat about 25 years, where has that time gone, of Tomorrow Never Dies, and I suppose your diving board moment, a bit like the lady in the titles, the moment where you dived into the world of Bond and you haven't really left it behind. So I'm going to go backwards a bit. I know how much You Only Live Twice and John Barry kind of changed your outlook and sense of music and sense of cinema, but why are you a music guy? What was it that actually got you? What are your influences?
I think everyone's influences are pretty much what are you listening. You know, what music do you have in your house when you're growing up? I think that's got to be the primary thing, because you're not concentrating or focusing on music. You are just living your best life. You know, whatever that incurs. You know, plasticine, toys, mousetrap, radio, messing about, school. You know, it's like you don't think consciously about I must sit down and listen to some music. And you know, I lived in a very musical house, in as much that there was always music on. You know, I can't really think of a time when there wasn't music on, whether it was a record player or the radio. So there was always music, and it was always flitting between Radio 1, which were the pop hits of the time, and Radio 2, which was very much, you know, from in the 60s certainly, you know, looking back at 40s and 50s and sort of classic American songbook. You know, so being exposed to so many different sorts of music without really knowing it, you know, so they all found their way in and kind of stayed there. So, you know, I've got quite a good knowledge of old songs and old artists, and you know, I'm saying old, I know it's a relative term, but you know, like the great songs from the sort of 40s, 50s, 60s, especially, I know lots of those, which I think kind of informed the way I approach songwriting, I think. Because you know, those songs were very much written from a sort of organic perspective, in as much that people sat down at a piano or with a guitar and wrote the song in its entirety. You know, it was not the way that you write songs now. You know, where people do a track or get a chord sequence and send it to someone else who puts some beats on it, who sends it to someone else who then tries to, you know, finds a top line melody. You know, for me, it's like the whole thing is an organic whole, which has come from the same thing. But it's that's you know, technology has democratized writing, which I think is a good thing. But you know, it sort of slightly does it at the expense of the way that people write. You know, I think people write differently now, but that's a different conversation. But that's how it was for me when I was growing up. It was very much a very musical house, and I think I'd say that's probably true for most people.
Yeah. So on that note, when were you aware of? I mean, I love that idea that when you went to a 7-year-old birthday party and You Only Live Twice played, and that was your first Bond moment. But when was the first time that you actually you were stopped by the radio at a new song, a new Bond song? When was that sort of moment where you started to sort of cock your ear and keep an ear out for the latest
with a new Bond song?
Yeah, when you were a kid, where was the first time you started to notice those songs hitting the charts and have an ear out for them?
Well, I mean, that's the interesting thing about having had this you know, sequence films for 60 years, is that it's like every day that I've been alive, they've been around. You know, so the idea, you know, I think the idea that all of a sudden there was a you know, a thing that popped up on the radio and go like, well, what's that? I mean, I had that when I saw the film, when I saw You Only Live Twice. You know, that was the moment when I noticed it, and of course, you know, from that point, I was able to go backwards, you know, earlier. I know not that many, but you know, I was able to then say, well, the same guys who made that had also made Thunderball and Russia with Love and Goldfinger and Dr. No. You know, extraordinary films, all of them, and hugely identifiable, you know, structurally, you know, creatively, artistically, musically, sonically, visually. You know, there was a thing, you know, that made it a Bond movie. And I think when you're, you know, 7, 8, 9 years old as a boy, and you know, you've got this grown-up man with basically loads of big grown-up toys running around having the time of his life by the looks of things, you know, you think like, well, I'd quite like to do that. Obviously without the murdering bit, but it was. I think culturally, it's been such a big part of our lives. I wouldn't like to say that there was a point when, other than Seeing You Only Live Twice, that makes you go like, whoa, what's that? I remember when I heard Live and Let Die, it was, I thought, an incredible diversion. A huge kind of turn on the style that we'd had for Bond songs, and in a way opened it up to a completely different way of looking at it, which again was interesting. It's always changing, and so it should.
You used to say, live and let live. But if this ever-changing world in which we live makes you giving and kind, say live and let die.
Now, I remember the real moments. I'm a diehard Bond fan, and I'm also a diehard Bond music fan. That's that's one of my key beats to the new film, and obviously going back, and it's often easier to put on a 3-minute track than watch perhaps Live and Let Die again, although I can do both easily. But Shaken and Stirred was a really key pivotal moment, and I think it was the first time in a long time, and certainly in my memory as a Bond music fan, that it felt like a new era, a new chapter. But you'd already done that, was already sort of finished and done whilst you were entering into chats about maybe taking the Bond music baton on, or did it really feed in? Was it the calling card that it could have been?
Well, in all honesty, it certainly wasn't designed like that. The reason why I did it was because I was a massive fan of James Bond music, and at that point in my life, I had just done 2 films, and they'd had a reasonable amount of success. I'd had a song, Play Dead, in The Young Americans, and a score which was kind of quite well received, and then I went straight on to Stargate, which kind of opened a lot of international interest, doors internationally, and all of a sudden you are someone to keep an eye on. But I always loved radio, and I've always loved songs, and from that point, from doing the track with Björk and doing Stargate, all of a sudden I was a guy who was working in sort of big movies and was making kind of these odd idiosyncratic records, and always I'd love studios, and I love songs, and I love radio. I think it's the greatest medium. No offense to theatre and cinema, but I do think that radio is the greatest, and I think songs are the finest of all art forms. Again, all apologies to novelists and poets everywhere, and sculptors and painters. That's just my thing. It's like, because it feels like it belongs to you as a sort of lay person, regardless of your position in any sort of industry. I think everyone has a song which they feel is theirs, and everyone has a record which kind of speaks to them, and everyone has just. I would imagine that most people have had a moment with music which has been quite profound. Sometimes life-changing, and sometimes consoling, sometimes exciting, and sometimes, I used to play certain songs when I was going to do my O-levels, to get me in the mood for it. So it was always music, and the record was because I had a few months between starting my next film and finishing the previous one, and I thought, well, now people answer the phone, whereas before they didn't. first recording I did was in 1995,
Mm-hmm.
and I did Diamonds Are Forever, You Only Live Twice, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Those are the three that I wanted to do, immediately. Those are the ones that I felt compelled to do. So Björk, luckily, saying You Only Live Twice, Dave McCalmont, who I'd loved for ages, had done Diamonds Are Forever, and Propellerheads came on and did On Her Majesty's with me. And I then punted those around record companies to see if anyone was interested in doing it. And in the punting of it, I then started. I think I did The Spy Who Loved Me with Amy Mann, and then started. I lived 3 doors up from Left Field, weirdly, and I'd been listening to their record quite a long time. I knocked on their door and said, "Do you fancy doing Space March?" which is another one that I loved, and Capsule in Space, and so they said yes to that. So all this stuff was going on before anyone got involved, and eventually East West said that they would, sort of carry on with it, and so I carried on making the record with them, and they did the artwork. We were waiting for people to, some people had to pull out, some people I couldn't wait any longer for because maybe they were touring and they couldn't get away. So there were some that I had planned to do that I didn't do. I was going to do Goldfinger, I think Blondie, Debbie Harry was going to do Goldfinger. I bumped into Stevie Wonder at a party and asked him to do one, and he said he wanted to do Live and Let Die, and I literally just recorded it 2 days before with Chrissie Hynde, and I thought, well, I can't, so that was no longer available, but I had to then not do that because I think Stevie Wonder's God. And anyway, so there were lots of things like that, little things that came and went, and some things settled. And we ended up with this record, which seemed like a lot of fun, and there's a lot of enthusiasm and love for it. And so I was making that through GoldenEye, I mean, I think I'd started it a couple of months. It was before GoldenEye had came out. I know that Eric was on it because MGM had shown me the teaser after Stargate had come out, because they knew I loved Bond stuff, and I loved the teaser. And I said I was making this record, and if ever John Barry doesn't do one, at least can you just give me a shout? And so they said, "Oh, well, we've got the next one sorted out." So I said, "Fine," and I just carried on with that record because I wanted to, and it was literally because I loved the songs and I wanted to do it. And then I'd finished it, and then I did Independence Day, and that went through the roof. And everything sort of carried on from that point on. And I was starting Godzilla when I got a phone call about Tomorrow Never Dies. And I think the record had come out at that point. And Shaking the Stone, I think, had it. I can't remember. Maybe it hadn't. But anyway, I'd sent some of these tracks to Barbara and Michael at Eon, so I wasn't, I kind of wanted to make sure I wasn't treading on anyone's toes in terms of IP. I sent them artwork, and I knew what I could and couldn't have and use and show, because it wasn't technically an Eon production. And I sent them to him just because, because I wanted them to hear them, really, because they were making the films and I loved the films, and it was a thank you for the, for someone, considering I'd had all these films all of a sudden were very big, and I was working on them, to take all that time off to record someone else's music is, a lot of people said, "Why are you doing that? You could be doing all these other things." And it was because I really wanted to. When it came down to Tomorrow Never Dies, I think it was a slightly easier decision to make, because by that time, the record had, was done, and they could hear where my head was at with Bond music, and Independence Day had come out and was this huge hit, so they knew that I could work in, on big films. So I think that definitely eased things in terms of making a decision, and the fact that John had, heard the record and liked it, and we'd met a few times, and he was very kind about what I was doing in public, which was kind of ridiculous.
What was that first conversation with Barbara and Michael like? Right, it's you. You're the anointed one. What was that like? And did they give any advice that has been really useful and beneficial for all the Bond stuff you've done since?
Well, I think the great value of Michael and Barbara as producers, and what makes them, I think, special and different is, they hire people, I think, on the strength of what they do, and they let them do it. They don't hire people and then tell them what to do. It's like, what's the point of like, for instance, if it was me getting a great singer, and there's an improvisation aspect to it, and I then tell them what to sing, there is no point. So they get a group of people together to make these films with them, and they let them make the film. Now they're very present in that process. I kind of likened it in a way to them being the safety bumpers at a 10-pin bowling alley, that you used to go to when you were kids, to stop your bowl leaping across into a place where it shouldn't be. We're all heading in the same direction. There's lots of ways of getting to the end, but we'll keep it on track. So they're very aware of that, and but there wasn't a sort of big moment that you might think it was. I mean, I had a phone call and I went to meet them. Barbara came up to see me actually at Air Studios, and we had a long talk actually about our fathers, because we both recently lost around at the same time, and just got on incredibly well, really, on a personal level, and I don't even think we talked about music much, really, because to a certain extent, I had a reasonable CV at that point, and there'd been a kind of a reasonable amount of commercial success, and the music had been well received, as well as it performed well, in the world of film commerce, I suppose. So in a way that was an easier thing, because it's like, okay, well, he obviously he can do it, and there's also this record which says James Bond music can sound like this, as well as all the other things it can sound like, and kind of did it from there, I think.
I mean, I hope you probably do, of course you do, but I hope you know how good the score is. Even 25 years later, which is partly why we're here looking at 25 years of Pierce Brosnan's second movie. But it's such a rich score. I always think a good Bond score should be completely of its time. And you were talking there before about Shaken and Stirred, and also that the whole idea of pop music and radio and that 3-minute window that appeals to you. And I think one of the great things of the Tomorrow Never Dies score is, whilst you perhaps didn't have involvement in each and every angle of it, it was a great sort of Venn diagram crossroads of Moby, K.D. Lang, Alex Gifford, the Propellerheads, Sheryl Crow, and yourself. And it was as much about Britpop, which is a phrase I always think gets bandied around too easily, but it was as much about a Britpop 1997 moment as perhaps Goldfinger, John Barry, Shirley Bassey was in 64. And I think that's some of the best Bond scores, really just align themselves to the times. You know, Adele particularly with Skyfall and that Jubilee year as well. What was the hardest part of doing it? What was the bit where you struggled? You know,
it's always intimidating when you've wanted to do something for a long time and you get the opportunity to do it, because you know, in my head, in my mind, I had, and forgive me if I'm using this metaphor again, but it does work. I always sort of likened it to climbing Everest. Like in your dreams, or in my dreams, you know, you think like you've climbed Everest, right? So in your dreams, you are on the peak of Everest, looking out over Everest, and you've stuck your flag in the top, and you take the photograph, and it's like, I've climbed Everest. And what you don't dream about is how long it takes to get to the top, or what that journey's like. You know, you just picture yourself having done it. And for me, the idea of doing a Bond score was like, I've done it. And you know, now you know, I've managed to be, you know, to contribute and be a part of this thing, which was so important to me. And when I got asked to do it, it was like a sort of brief second of elation followed by an absolute, you know, panic, because all of a sudden you're not thinking about doing it. All of a sudden you're doing it. All of a sudden your ideas about, well, I have these kind of, you know, nebulous ideas about what I could do, but until someone said you have to do it, you don't. You know, I'd never sat down and written, well, if I'm going to write a Bond score, if I'm going to write a Bond song, this is what I'm going to write, and you know, I'm doing it and waiting for someone to ask. You know, I'd never done it. I'd never thought about doing it in that respect. So at that point, it was like, well, I've actually got to do it now, and that's sort of mildly terrifying. But they did lead me into it very gently, and let me they to score the opening sequence, you know, the pre-title sequence, as a separate standalone thing, just to see how we all got on, you know, and it was a lovely thing for them to do. And so we had it with a full orchestra, obviously, and I thought, well, if I'm going to write a Bond score, then I'm going to need to write a Bond song, because I think, you know, I'm such a huge fan of the interpolation of the song into the score, and you know, for it being holding hands with, hopefully with a composer. Certainly my favorite one's always been, you know, when John has written with, you know, the score and the song, because, you know, you feel like there's a sense of, musically, this is what this film is about. And John had a brilliant way of encapsulating that in, you know, the first 5 seconds of every song that he wrote. You know, it's like there's the movie right there. You know, quite extraordinary talent he had. And I thought, well, from a kind of perspective of someone who loves these things and who loves Bond songs and loves the scores, I'm going to write a song. You know, I had no idea whether it would get used. It didn't matter. You know, it's like I was working on a Bond movie, and I thought, I'm going to write a Bond song anyway, because that's going to be my theme for this movie. I'd read the script. I'd seen some rushes. I'd spoken to Roger Spottiswoode. I'd spoken to Pierce. I'd spoken to Barbara and Michael. Had an idea about where it was all heading, you know, the kind of tone of it. And I knew we were coming off of GoldenEye, which, you know, sort of reignited the franchise. And Pierce was great and hugely popular and a lovely man. And you know, you felt like, okay, well, this is the spirit of it. And if we were going to kick a door in, you know, and go, we're back, then I wanted the song to do that. You know, hence that crashing intro, you know, boom, bam, you know, it's a proper here I am moment. And so that's why I wanted to write the song. And that became the sort of main central thematic core of the score, and that appears in the opening sequence. And you know, so before any decision was made about songs or anything, it was like I'd already scored the opening with that as my kind of spinal column, you know, the spine and in fact the skeleton of the entire score basically is the song. And variations therein, some new themes as well as you go through, but you know, you find that as you go through the movie. But you know, I think I could sit, if I sat there and played you on a piano, kind of like the song with the instrument of the song, that says Tomorrow Never Dies. And that's what I kind of wanted it to have. I wanted people to be able to hear, somehow see the movie in that song, because whenever I listen to John Barry's songs, that's what I do. I feel the movie in it, the entirety of it.
And famously or infamously, I presume, "Surrender" and the song that the brilliant, bombastic. I still love it. I think it's a glorious piece of Bond music composition.
Yeah.
But you wrote it with David McCalmont and Don Black. And it got, there was a little bit of last minute feng shui, I think, and things got rearranged and moved. And I think I'm glad it closes the film, because it's why not? We've not always had, dare I say it, not in your era as well, but we've not always had great. The music at the end of a Bond film is often a quick edit reprise of what we've had before.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was the first time I felt we had two title songs, if that makes sense, properly.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
sat alongside each other. Was it always Katie Lang that you had in mind? Are you able to say, other
No,
talents?
always her. Always her. I was completely obsessed with her Ingenue album. I kind of never really stopped listening to that for a couple of years, I think. It was just, sometimes you have the perfect voice in your head for what you're writing, and she was it. And I don't know anyone else who could have done it, if I'm being honest.
No. It's the undulations. I love those undulations she's got. She kind of bridges it all. I'm not a muso, so I'm probably using all the phrases here. But I was listening to it this morning. It's still a really rich song and a rich Bond song, because I think that a good Bond song should be a good song in its own first.
Yeah,
almost.
Well, it's the sort of velvety way she finds her way in and around. Before you know it, you're kind of encased in her vocal. You start off being in front of it, and you finish being inside it. It's just, she's got an extraordinary technical ability, but just the amount of interpretive and also genuine emotional heft that she can deliver in a vocal is I think it's very moving, and I've seen her loads of times live, and it's a quasi religious experience. She's just got one of those voices.
Does she ever do it live? Does the Surrender come out the?
I don't know, actually. I've never seen her do it live. No, never have.
I did look.
I don't
online,
know. I don't know if she ever has, but it's got some big notes in it. But she did it. She made it feel and sound effortless, and it was one of the easiest recordings I've ever had, because she starts singing and you just shut up and record it. You know what I mean? It's like 2 or 3 takes, and that was it. It was every single thing was gold. And as a fan of someone, to be able to sit in a room with them and watch them do this is something special. Same with Scott Walker on Only Myself to Blame. It's like, he's like, this is good, isn't it? Because that's Scott Walker over there.
Just not too bad. Not too shabby. What was the one cue or track that you think 25 years later, I nailed that? I'm proud of that track, or that sort of moment of music.
I still do really like Surrender. I think it's great. I tend to like the things that I do with other people, because it makes me not think about what I've done so much. So, Backseat Driver's good fun.
I got 3 points on my license because of that tune.
You're not the first person to say
driving down the A3. Yeah. It's like, never mind. But I'd rather get it than something else.
Yeah, the Harlong Bay cue with the that melody, which is kind of like an electric guitar thing, I really like. And before it goes back into a kind of warm, sort of sort of like medicated, dreamy version of the melody in Surrender.
So you've never really, you've done 5 Bond scores and counting, but you've never really left the Bond music fold. They pull you back for certain things, like sometimes consulting on a big event, or working on like an NPL piece of music to launch a new range of Bond cashmere. It's not a line I always think anyone would say.
No, I know, isn't it?
I'm still waiting to see you wear the jumper,
because I hadn't written any Bond music for years.
Yeah,
and the NPL thing was like completely under the radar, and like zero expectations, I think, from anyone. And it was great fun to be able to just, you start it again, you go like, oh yeah, no, I'm all right, I can do this.
Yeah, as it kind of,
I remember.
as it whetted your appetite.
I love it. I loved it. Yeah, I mean, I loved doing it. It was great. Really, really good fun.
So you got, say, if you know the fates allowed and events happened, would you, you know, Barbara says, David, we never ended at 5. You've got a real eye and ear for talent. You know, it's very eclectic. You almost have that Wes Anderson sense of ensemble. These people, these curios that you put together, like even, you know, and I think it was most evident at the beautiful, brilliant 60th anniversary concert at the Albert Hall a couple of months back, where you know you'd cast that so well. So, but you know, in the years since you've not done a Bond score, there must be some new talent out there that you think, oh, that could add a new shade and a new.
Well, there's an endless amount of it, really, isn't there? I mean, it's like casting the character. It's almost impossible until you see the film. And you get or read the script and you have an idea about what the core of it is. You know, I think you kind of need to understand the heart of the film, and then you go around and you try and find someone who you think belongs in that world. You know, I mean, I was just thinking the other day that weirdly, just retrospectively thinking about Bond, and I was thinking like, well, in a world of kind of huge budget studio movies, you know, I've had K.D. Lang, Chris Cornell, Scott Walker, Garbage, you know, in that fold, and you know, and obviously, you know, would have been Amy Winehouse as well at one point. You know, and I'm thinking like that's a pretty cool bunch of people to have, you know, to have in Bond movies. You know, you wouldn't think that would be a thing, but there it is, and so I'm pleased with that. And also, again, you know, that's huge amount of respect to Barbara Michael for allowing that to happen, because you know they can have anyone they want and do anything they want, and they do trust their you know their people to do what they think is right. And you know, there's always going to be contentious. There's always going to be people who, you know, like things and don't like things and would prefer something else, and everyone wants, you know, I think it should be like this, and someone else wants the opposite. You know, you got to kind of do what you think is right for it, and you know, I think if you do it honestly and enthusiastically, you know, with a real sense of knowing that the film is king, and you know, have an awareness of its history, but also, you know, the possibilities of its future, that you know that you can you'll do your best stuff.
So, say if you had a bit of spare time and you've got and someone says, right, we've got some artists, we've got some studio time, bit of budget, we can do Shaken and Stirred 2. Would you do it, or would it be a bit weird going back and doing that again now? Because I mean, also, would you be brave enough to do your own songs?
Right, first, no, I wouldn't do my own songs, because there was something about that which makes me think that, well, that's different to how I did them in the first place, and you're supposed to be making the definitive version when you do your own thing. And also, I don't think I'd ever get better than those versions that I've done anyway. But I think I wouldn't, on the basis that, you know, when I did it in 95, 96, we had a lot of historical perspective on those songs. You know, culturally they made a huge impact, and stylistically they were very particular. And you know, in fact, it was pre Pierce Brosnan. You know, so quite a long time ago in terms of the history of the character. But what we don't have now is, you know, 30 years of perspective on Daniel Craig's tenure and the songs that have appeared therein. You know, so we don't have that sense of where we are now, where we were then. Can we look at it like this? But that's not saying that you can't. It's just that, you know, for me, it still feels contemporary. You know, and what I loved about making Shaken and Stirred was that, in a way, it was a kind of, you know, reignition of my childhood. In a way, you know, the effect that it had on me, and the joy that I had watching a new Bond movie with the family, you know, at Christmas or at Easter. You know, but that doesn't happen anymore either. You know, we tend not to gather around the TV and watch a Bond movie on Christmas Day, or, you know, unless you choose to. It doesn't pop up, you know, and it's not, you know, because we have these things on request all the time. You know, you can watch it whenever you want in those days, before online or streaming services, you would only see a Bond movie if it was broadcast on the TV, and that was usually 4, 5, 6 years after it came out in the cinema. And it would only be on once or twice, it wouldn't be on that frequently. Whereas now it's like, the entire season, all of them season, the entire series is on Amazon, and you can watch it anytime you want, and any of the films multiple times. So that aspect of it has changed. So, the kind of mystical, it's a Bond film, for younger people, I think has changed. I think for us who are a bit older, it was a bit of a mythic thing. It was had great sort of mystery and great power, because the idea of a cinematic event, was very much a cinematic event. But now we are sold the idea of the cinematic event of the year every 3 times a week. So, the whole thing has kind of been diluted in a way, but Bond still attracts the headlines, and it's still a huge deal. But, for me, I don't think I'm quite far enough away from, up from these newer songs to be able to have a sort of perspective which makes any sense. It's not a bigger part, it's not a bigger chunk of my life. Whereas, like, if you had someone now who was 25 who was doing it, obviously, 2006 when Casino Royale came out, like, these people were babies. If you think like Surrender, someone's 25, 26 now, they were born when Surrender came out.
Oh, well, Billie Eilish,
kind of perspective. That kind of makes it. Yeah, that makes sense. For someone younger who may have grown up with it and therefore has a different take on it. But for someone who grew up with them already and is now, living with the new ones with you have a slightly different head on, don't you? It's not quite the same.
Yeah.
So I would probably not, just because, and also the idea of doing more Bond songs.
You'd rather do the main feature, really. I think think you still.
I just think there's a lot of other things I want to do before I do that. Just musically or creatively, there's only so many years you've got, and I've done quite a lot of Bond stuff and I've loved it and I still love it. But there are other things I'd probably like to do before I did another one of those. And also, I'd like one-offs. I like special events. I like things that happen, and I still really like the fact that Stargate's never had a sequel.
Yeah.
Because I like Stargate. I liked it a lot, and it's always what it is. It won't ever be changed by having a sequel or someone talking about it in a different way. And I'm not counting the TV shows in that, because that's a slightly different thing. But I like these one-off things. I'm not a big fan of sequels, to be honest. And I don't see Bond as sequels. I see them as series. But anyway, that's just me.
Well,
I like things that are one-offs.
Yeah. Well,
and Shake and Disturb is like a one-off.
And a brilliant one it is too. I still hold you, because I know you've always had a little notion of getting ABBA involved in Bond, so that's my fantasy. And time's running out. Well, time's running out for all of us. But And, but even that new album there's a year ago, I thought, maybe, just maybe. So yeah, if you could just work on that on the side, that'd be really useful. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, of course, the only problem with ABBA is that why would I be writing it with them?
Of course.
It's like you wouldn't sit between those two and go like, oh, wait a minute, I've got an idea.
Yeah, you're good, but you're not that good. Yeah, exactly. Yes. All right, David, I really, really appreciate your time here. I know you've
lovely.
Lots
Thanks
of
so much.
25 years of Tomorrow Never Dies. It's getting a great reissue from La La Land Records as well.
Yes,
so
fantastic.
That's going to be on my shopping list. So thank you, David.
No worries. Hopefully see you soon.